will bring persistent rain in places. That will sink south into central parts of the UK, eventually clearing into Wales and the southwest by dawn, turning more showery as it pushes south. Clear spells following. Under those clear skies, some mist and fog forming across the Midlands, eastern England, for example, and a chilly start in places first thing Thursday, where we get those clear spells. Temperatures in some spots into the low single figures. But after any mist and fog clear, after the sun warms things up, actually for many, it's a brighter afternoon. Sunny spells, but there will be further showers coming along, especially for eastern Scotland, eastern parts of England, into central areas. Temperatures, though, up a degree or so compared with Wednesday. We're looking at 18 Celsius, the top temperature there for parts of Wales and the southwest. Down to Thursday evening, areas of showers will push south, fading away, and lengthy clear spells then for many, at least at first. But for Scotland and Northern Ireland, thicker clouds start to arrive. The wind picks up, and by the early hours, outbreaks of rain into the far northwest. That'll keep things mild here, but across central and eastern parts of the UK, well, it's a colder night to come with low single figures in places and some dense fog around first thing Friday. The fog will last until around mid-morning, then it'll clear. Bright skies follow for the Midlands, East Anglia and the South East, at least for a time, before wind and rain sweep in from the west. Heavy rain, particularly over western hills, and strong winds reaching gale force in exposed spots. Saturday's also a blustery day with rain or showers, but it turns drier on Sunday.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
very good evening. It is 6 o'clock. Thank you very much for joining me tonight on GB News. Bev Turner in for Michelle all week. We've got a fantastic panel of mega brains. I've got filmmaker Kerry Dingle with me and Peter Hitchens tonight. We're going to be discussing, is Blairism basically back? And what do we mean by that? After Keir Starmer's speech yesterday, is his Labour simply New Labour in disguise? One thing that is very different from 1997, of course, the economy. It's taken a serious battering again today, so much so that the Bank of England has had to step in to save pensions. So just what do my guests and you think is going wrong for Britain's finances? And as more migrants cross the Channel, we look at reports today of a secret deal with the French to stop the crossings, but it all fell apart, reportedly thanks to some controversial comments by new PM Liz Truss. All of that to come tonight on Dewbs & Co. with me, Bev Turner. But first, the news headlines with Polly.
Bev, thank you. Good evening to you. The government has denied it's responsible for the downturn in the financial markets, blaming the UK's spiralling economy on the war in Ukraine. Financial Secretary to the Treasury, Andrew Griffith, also welcomed the Bank of England's timely intervention following sterling's slide, saying every major country is dealing with volatility. He says the government's plans will help both the economy and struggling households.
Every major economy is dealing with exactly these same issues. And the Bank of England has made this timely intervention, doing what it should do, what the government should do, what the Chancellor and I are focused on, is delivering that economic growth plan, which is ultimately what's going to help people. It's going to give people the confidence. It's going to create jobs in the economy and keep people in work so that they can make it through the winter, benefit from that protection in energy and continue to protect our standard of living.
Well, earlier on, the Chancellor told investment bankers the government is committed to what he called fiscal responsibility. Kwasi Kwarteng is trying to reassure city investors that his economic plan will work. That's after the International Monetary Fund issued a rare statement last night criticising his tax-cutting measures. And the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, is now demanding Parliament be recalled, and he wants to see the mini-budget reversed.
Has clearly lost control of the economy. And unlike other situations where it may be a world event, an unexpected event that causes this sort of crisis, this is self-inflicted. This was made in Downing Street last Friday. And for what? For uncosted tax breaks for those earning hundreds of thousands of pounds. And so what the government needs to do now is recall Parliament and abandon this budget before any more damage.
Well, away from worries about the pound, the new Northern Ireland secretaries held talks with the Republic of Ireland for the first time since the cabinet reshuffle in an attempt to settle the Northern Ireland Protocol. Chris Heaton-Harris and the Irish Foreign Minister Simon Coveney met at Hillsborough Castle this morning. Mr Coveney saying there's now a willingness in the British government to have a serious dialogue over the post-Brexit trade agreement.
Some of our discussions really has been to rebuild a partnership approach that really has been the foundation of the peace agreement that happened nearly 25 years ago, where when there are difficulties and problems, the two governments, through the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland and the Irish Foreign Minister, work together to try to put compromises in place that parties can live with. I believe it is absolutely doable for us to get that work done.
Well, in news away from home, the European Commission has announced further sanctions against Russia after it held so-called annexation referenda in occupied regions in Ukraine. Moscow claims 4 regions voted overwhelmingly in favour of joining Russia. But the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, described the votes as a sham. She also said EU sanctions have been extended and will make the Kremlin pay for escalating the conflict. The EU's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, is urging international countries to condemn Russia's actions.
Condemn in the strongest possible term, and I am sure I can speak on behalf of the member states of the European Union that none of them will recognise this falsified outcome, and we call to the international community to do the same, because this sham referendum is a pure violation of international law and the principles of the United Nations Charter.
Well, here, train drivers are set to stage more strikes in October as part of a long-running dispute over pay, jobs and conditions. Members of the RMT, ASLEF, Unite and the TSSA will stage a coordinated walkout this Saturday. A reduced timetable has been published, with only 11% of rail services expected to run and some areas having no trains at all. Network Rail says passengers should expect significant disruption and only to travel if necessary. That's it. You're up to date on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. You're with GB News, the People's Channel, where Bev Turner's about to host Dewbs & Co.
Good evening. Welcome to Dewbs & Co. With me tonight, Bev Turner. My panel: I'm so happy to say columnist for the Mail on Sunday, Peter Hitchens, is here, which means I might struggle to get a word in edgeways. I might just say go and let you talk for an hour, Peter. Filmmaker Kerry Dingle is also here. Great to meet you, Kerry. I'm a big fan of yours on GB News. I also want to know what your thoughts are on tonight's topics. Does Keir Starmer represent a new Labour? Is he what you need out there? If you're going to vote red, get in touch with me, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or on Twitter @GBNews. Now, things can only get better. They were actually playing that at the Labour Party conference, would you believe it? The classic D-Ream song, made famous in Tony Blair's 1997 election campaign. It was playing all night, apparently, as Keir Starmer drags the party firmly back onto the centre ground. Or does he? His conference speech evoked Blair's famous words that Labour should be the political wing of the British people. Let's remind you how Starmer pitched himself over the last few days at conference.
Country first, party second. Slava Ukraini. We are the party of the centre ground. Once again, the political wing of the British people.
The party of the centre ground. So my question for you all at home tonight, and also to my panel here, I'll start with you, Peter. Do you hear echoes of Blairism? And as I ask you that, what do you see that means? What do you think that means when we talk about Blairism, and does he represent it?
Oh, Blairism means Eurocommunism. It means a very hard left series of ideas, constitutional, political, economic, social and moral reform, pursued with great vigour under a smokescreen of assumed moderation and rubbishy slogans such as tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime, and education, 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 which turn out to mean nothing. It's a public relations smarmy cover for a very, very active and very radical programme. And those of us who survived the first Blair terror are bracing ourselves now for another under Mr Starmer. Sir Keir, as one should always remember to call him. They're all knights now, aren't they? The other extraordinary thing in these debates is always the use of the phrase centre. It doesn't mean anything. If I asked you to provide me with a centrometer, which could tell me where exactly the centre of politics was, you couldn't provide me one. There is no objective measure. What centre means is you agree with me. And what centre tends to mean is what the majority of political figures, political media commentators, and persons of that kind have all decided is the policy for now. And when the Blair takeover happened in 1997, it was Blairism. Many of them didn't understand it. Some did, and those that did knew that it was a more or less revolutionary proposition. Mr Starmer is not like Mr Blair. I didn't like Mr Blair's, or Sir Anthony as we must now call him, performances very much. I thought they were huge piles of tottering, solidified drivel. But he could at least act, whereas Sir Keir's delivery is not so much wooden as akin to wet cement failing to dry. And it's not a compulsive watch in the way that Blair could sometimes be. So he doesn't have that. On the other hand, what he does have is, of course, a very vulnerable Conservative government, which Blair also had at that stage. Because
if I remember rightly, correct me if I'm wrong, but basically when Tony Blair won, it was about 178-seat majority in 97, it was coming off the back of the idea that anything would be better than the Conservatives at that point, wasn't it?
Well, these things happen from time to time. I think Jim Callaghan was the Prime Minister who said it when Thatcher won in 79. There comes a moment in British politics where it doesn't matter what you do or say, the public have decided it's time for a change, and there will be one. And the Blair people were very aware that if they could only keep quiet about what they really wanted to do and present themselves as slickly as possible, they would benefit from that change. Yeah. And of course they were handed this by a major government, which didn't really look very much as if it wanted to survive anyway. You know, the day Major lost the election, he went off to the cricket. He didn't seem to be in the slightest bit bothered about having been kicked out of the best job he ever had.
A bit like Boris Johnson leaving.
Yeah, they didn't. There was no fight in them, and so they basically handed it over without a struggle. And for the several years afterwards, they didn't put up a fight against him either.
Kerry, this idea that maybe Labour would get in because nothing is as bad as the Conservatives, they're doing very well. Labour are doing very well in the polls this week, and they haven't suffered with the conference going on. They are coming out ahead in so many of the polls. A lot can happen. But why do you think now they might be popular? Is it because people have been so tired of 12 years of Conservatives, and particularly the last 2 years? As opposed to Keir Starmer being this amazing white knight, literally, metaphorically, coming over the horizon.
Possibly. I mean, I think there's a real, maybe an anti-Conservative backlash, but it's certainly not enthusiasm for Labour. I mean, I just don't see it. I don't hear it. I don't see it. And if you say Blair, you know, the young people I work with will go, oh, yeah, war, you know, the
war in
illegitimate war against Iraq and based on a lie of WMD or the Balkans or Afghanistan or, you know, not impressive at all. And there's no doubt that Blairism kind of set the scene in terms of the degradation of education, the rise of emotional literacy, the rise of identity politics, all of which we've seen in boatloads. With Sir Keir and the Labour Party now. But my attitude is yuck. Oh, yuck.
You don't want
I
any more of
can't
that.
see, you know, who's going, Keir, rah, rah, rah. No, I just think people are very worried about, you know, everything that's going on. And, you know, Boris didn't do a good job over the pandemic.
But this is one of those elections where the government will lose it rather than the opposition will win it.
Yeah.
The fact that he doesn't inspire anybody very much doesn't mean that
He won't get in.
I don't think that Starmer's Labour Party will win a majority. I think they'll have to rely on others to attain a majority. But at the moment, I think there's a very grave danger the Tories will lose their majority, and it's very hard to see how they can maintain it. So somebody else will have to inherit government. And then you get the next stage, and this is the fascinating thing, why British politics is now becoming horribly interesting. If there is some kind of alliance between the Labour Party and the Lib Dems, it will, I think, result in a change in the Constitution again, which has long been desired by many people on the left, and we will go over to proportional representation. And that will mean there's never another Tory government again, ever. And that will be its intention. And that change may well be just over the horizon. There's a huge row going on about it in the Labour Party at the moment. Starmer doesn't really want to discuss it, but a lot of the unions, which have previously been against it, are beginning to shift in favour because they can see that politically, if the left wants to keep the Tories out and be in power permanently, it's the way there. But to do that, they will almost certainly have to cooperate with Liberal Democrats.
The only thing I disagree with you on there, Peter, is when you talk about the left, because it doesn't strike me as very left at all. And I think left and right seem to be overlapping in all weird ways these days.
But Kerry, it's not supposed to strike you as the left. The whole design of it has been, ever since the New Labour project was put together in the 1990s, and since the left basically re-engineered itself after the collapse of the Soviet Union, has been that the left doesn't look like the left anymore. They're not out to nationalise anything. They're not interested in that. They're not particularly interested in trade unions.
They don't like the working class. That's for sure.
That's all gone as a political feature as far as they're concerned. They have other constituencies they want to appeal to, and they do. And the whole idea you don't seize the post office and the barracks anymore. You seize the television studio and the university and the school. That's what they do, and it's all about sex, drugs and rock and roll, not about nationalising the lorry industry. And it's a different sort of left. It's a much more subtle and clever left, and it's one which has actually browbeaten the Conservatives, as you rightly say, into supporting most of its policies. But so much of it is about things which people previously hadn't understood were left-wing policies. But after, first of all, 1968 and then the collapse of the Soviet Union, the left completely re-engineered itself, and this is what happened.
I think you give them perhaps too much credibility.
No.
I mean, I just think, you know, left and right don't exist in the same way in terms of, I don't think you can put people into those easy boxes anymore. You know...
When do you think that changed, though?
No, I think it's been a gradual evolution, and I think Peter's right probably about the timeline in terms of the evolution, in terms of what happened after the collapse of the Soviet Union, where people went. But if you know, for most of us now, you know that if you're interested in freedom and free speech, you'll look to what people refer to as the right. And if you're interested in welfarism and victimhood and identity politics, you'll look to the so-called left. But what does that mean, really, for anybody?
Are you clear? Is it still clear to you, Peter, what, as someone who has just marinated yourself in this for decades?
Yeah, sorry about that.
we're very grateful for you having done that. But is it still clear to you what the left and the right is? Because with Giorgia Meloni being elected in Italy this week, being described as a far-right politician, does that fit for you?
Well, I think the problem with Giorgia Meloni is that her roots, her political roots and her personal political roots are with the MSI, which was a proto-fascist Mussolini apologising organisation. She can't shake that off, and in Italy it remains fantastically important. And this is a problem you always find in continental right-wing politics, that there will always be somebody sitting there who wants to put in a good word for Mussolini or even the other one, and they're completely messed up by that, as far as I'm concerned. But it's in this country we don't have that. What we have is a totally different thing. We had two parties which were, one of them was a party of business, party of the middle class, and a party of patriotism, and the other one was a party of the working class and of trade unionism and of Methodism. And they were remarkably similar in some ways, but also very different in others. But all that changed. To try and explain it simply, I'd say that what you now have in the country as a division is a division more or less between the Guardian newspaper and the Daily Mail. They stand for the two sides in politics now. Or you could take, say, me versus Polly Toynbee as a good example of where the division really lies. The problem with it is that the Conservative Party is not on the Conservative side of this argument. The Conservative Party has completely bought the Polly Toynbee and Guardian side of the argument, on sexual politics particularly, on immigration, on numbers of other things. And so there isn't really a political right in this country anymore. There's a political left, and then there's another party.
Yeah, I think there's a huge area of grey. That's what strikes me. And I'd be really interested to know what GB News viewers think in terms of, are they at all enthusiastic about what Labour now represents, or is it literally just time for change and that's how they're seeing it? Because I don't see, what is this party going to offer us? All we've had this week, I mean, you can't deal with your history and your failure to do anything to even support the democratic vote for Brexit, if you're Keir Starmer. You can't cover that up by singing, the national anthem and waving the Union Jack and hope everything will be lovely. Or creating a new green consortium and sticking GB in front of it. I don't think people are sold on this.
So did you not take that as nationalising our energy company in that very old-fashioned left?
Well, they'd like to dress it up in all sorts of ways, but in truth, what are they offering us? A green agenda, which necessarily will mean austerity for thousands or for millions of working class families, and which I have got no time for. And that's where, the left seem to have gone down the green road, been very influential, I think Peter's right, in terms of the mainstream, and taking on board the idea that human beings are bad news, toxic for the planet, and we should all make sacrifices.
Yeah.
Well, where does that leave? Look, they're not going to get my vote.
Live a smaller life. Yeah, we had Rachel Reeves saying she's going to be the first Green Chancellor.
Yes, but you get the same thing from the Tories. They're onto net zero as well. You don't look at Labour and say this party is too green for me, therefore I'll vote Tory, because you'll be disappointed. They're more or less the same. That issue is one of the
grey lump,
which are completely closed because there is no properly Conservative formation in British politics.
The other issue, which is completely closed, of course, is Russia and Ukraine. And of course, Keir Starmer said in his speech yesterday about he put a shout out to Ukraine to say how supportive he was of that and to show his solidarity to that country. Did you expect anything else?
No, it is the conventional wisdom of the time that this is what we should do, and it's a real uphill struggle for anybody to argue against it. And if I were in electoral politics, then it would probably be suicidal of me to turn around and say, actually, I don't think that this policy we have towards the Ukraine issue is very sensible, which I don't. But I know from experience that many people have decided that it is a great, straightforward contest between good and evil, in which there is only one good side and one evil side, and no complications at all. And even to argue that this might possibly be an oversimplification, is to be called within about 30 seconds, and it'll be coming up on your screen any minute now, a Putin apologist and a Kremlin mouthpiece, and all the other stupid, moronic things which people call anyone who dissents from it.
A bit less, I think.
Hopeless.
Definitely less.
No, I don't.
Definitely less than a few months ago.
Oh, I think more. I think it's got deeper. At the beginning, it was more open, I felt, but I found more and more that
I feel like it's been a bit of a
absolute iron wall of consensus, which is almost impossible to breach. And there it is. It's emotional. It's like the green. It's like the green thing. It's almost religious in its intensity. And if you dissent from it, then you are a heretic, and people will want to put you on a pyre and burn you.
Well, I think people are very wrong to call you a Putin apologist or a Kremlin mouthpiece, obviously. And that's just a backward way of trying to shut down the debate, which I wouldn't support at all. But I do think it is not, to me, it's not a simple question of good or evil. It is a matter of the question of national sovereignty and where we stand on that and whose side we take in relation to, I see it as freedom or being enslaved due to the invasion by another country. And we wouldn't, you know, if someone, the EU wants to annex Scotland, we're not going to go, on you go then, or have fake referendums under force and duress, as we've seen today. I don't think we'd want to go along with it. So I don't agree with you on Ukraine, but I don't call you a Putin apologist.
Because I agree with you about that. I'm not in favour of fake referendums. I'm not in favour of invading other countries. I'm also not in favour of overthrowing other people's governments by cunningly organised putsches, as happened to the legitimate government of Ukraine in 2014, which seems to me to be just as wicked and disruptive and aggressive an action as invading.
Well, I was very critical of what happened in 2014, but that doesn't change what's happening now. That doesn't change what's happening now. And I think
it changes your assessment of the significance.
Well, does it?
Yes.
You know, in terms of whether Zelensky's, a legitimate individual or whether it was a bunch of nuns, I would still support Ukraine in this war against an invading country. And like you, but differently, I've been called an evil imperialist. I've lost more friends over Ukraine than I have over Brexit, weirdly, they call you a Putin apologist, they call me an evil imperialist. Yeah. People will do that these days to shut down debate, which is very sad.
Because again, you see, I think that obviously the country which is invaded is the country which has to be supported against being invaded. But the question is, how do you support it? Is the best thing to do with that country to actually corral it, more or less, into a very, very long war? In which many, many more people will die and become refugees, or is it to, in some way, use the power of the great nations, particularly the United States, to obtain peace and a workable compromise? And to decide what that compromise must be, you have to know what the real issues are at stake. And they're not a simple matter of a wonderful, free, glorious, incorruptible country and a hideous monster. It's more complicated, and it always is more complicated.
We're going to be talking about the economy in just a moment.
Sorry about
Kerry.
that. I mean,
no.
I think you introduced it. But
I listen. I love our debates, and it's just brilliant. And they go off in different directions, and we're okay with that. But we're going to be talking about the economy in a minute. But what I'm finding as well, and from GB viewers particularly, is that in terms of how people feel about the Ukraine war, I think there is a dawning questioning of the not the morality, because I think people feel quite certain that as you say, the Ukrainian people do need support, but the logic of continually sending billions and billions of British pounds to fight a war that people do not feel is affecting them at the time when we have a cost of living crisis and we have, energy bills that barely can meet. We've got the economy on its knees. That is what people are now wondering. What is the end point and how much money are we happy to give away?
Well, yes, and does Ukraine benefit from a long war, which is basically a war between Russia and America fought on Ukrainian soil, or does Ukraine benefit from an intelligently negotiated peace? I have no doubt, having seen a little bit of war, that an intelligently negotiated peace would be better. But I'm immediately accused of appeasement, of surrender. But countries which are at war, if they're sensible, do agree peace. It's what you have to do sooner or later, and in my view, sooner is better than later.
Yeah.
Because of the dead people who would otherwise have
course.
I think a negotiated peace is always a good thing, but I think that's not our business to decide. I think that is the business of the Ukrainian people. And while I completely understand viewers' concern, I think the idea, which we've heard today from the government, by the way, which I thought was a bit outrageous, saying that the war in Ukraine is the cause of the run on the pound. And I'm like, oh, hello, that's pushing your luck. Poor investment for a really long time in a stagnant economy, which I know we're going to move on to, is much more of a big problem than the war in Ukraine in terms of what's sucking the life out of our economy.
But Kerry, just one tiny...
causing us a rise in living standards. Yes, it's been affected by the war in Ukraine, but it's not the underlying cause.
Just
and we're going to work out
a tiny point. Could I just make?
Hang on to your tiny point, Peter, because we do have to take a quick break. We are going to be talking about the economy. We're going to be picking up from that in just a moment. Please keep your views coming. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Is Britain's economy being battered beyond repair? The IMF warns that it could be as the Bank of England steps in. See you in a minute.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV.
On radio and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's
News channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Bev Turner. My panel tonight, columnist for The Mail on Sunday, Peter Hitchens, and filmmaker Kerry Dingle. You have been sending in your opinions. We were talking about whether Keir Starmer is good news or not. Marcus said, I very much doubt you'll see Keir Starmer in a Greggs queue for a bacon roll and a coffee. He sounds like Blair. Why do they lie? Chris says bad Conservatives do not equal good Labour. And Brian said, I would never vote for Labour as I wouldn't trust them, especially on reversing Brexit. People need to remember that the current leader was a driving force behind wanting a second referendum. But I think so was the PM, wasn't she?
I think so. It's hard to keep up with that.
Oh, she did. Yeah, there we go. Right, thank you very much for getting in touch. Right, massive issue today. It seems like the list of economic woes facing the country cannot get any longer. Food prices rising 10%, the housing market on the brink of collapse, an unprecedented ticking off from the IMF, and now the Bank of England has stepped in to buy bonds and stave off a financial crisis. All of that, some of it did start before, but mainly since new Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng's mini-budget on Friday. To explain what is happening, we have got GB News' economics and business editor, Liam Halligan. Liam, where do you want to start today? I feel like you should just be on it all the time, really, 24 hours a day, can't you, talking about what a mess the economy has done? What are the big headlines from today and why? Why are they happening?
Well, the big headline from today, Bev, is that the Bank of England sort of took the first step on the ladder of emergency measures. This is an emergency measure, what happened today, because it happened outside the normal run of Bank of England meetings. They're usually every month, though there isn't one scheduled for October, ironically. What the Bank of England did today, it wasn't an emergency interest rate rise to defend the currency, which some have been calling for. They slightly tweaked the way the bond market works, believe it or not, but just bear with me. What the Bank of England did is it started buying bonds out of the market, that is, buying government debt, in order to make it easier for the government to issue new government debt. There has been a sense that if the government's issuing too much debt because of those tax cuts, there's been concern the fiscal sums don't add up. The government would then have to pay more, a higher rate of interest for that debt. Well, the Bank of England, in some senses, came to the government's aid today, and early days, but it seems to have worked. So the pound is actually now up on the day. It's up about $1.09. That's $1.09. It started the day about $1.07. It went down, but now it seems to have recovered since the Bank of England made that intervention. But more importantly than the currency, though the currency gets all the headlines, the important thing is what's called the 10-year gilt yield. That is the rate at which the government borrows in the money markets to fund public services and all the rest of it. That government borrowing rate of interest, which ripples out across the whole of the rest of the economy to mortgages, personal loans and all the rest of it, that fell after the Bank of England's intervention in the bond markets from around 4.5% down to below 4% at one stage, and it's right at 4% just before I came on air. So the intervention by the Bank of England, it could have been seen as a panic measure. It could have made things worse. But for now, at least, early days, but it seems to have held the road and calmed down financial markets.
Is that the kind of decision, Liam, that will have been made by the Bank of England or by the Bank of England in collaboration with Kwasi Kwarteng? Or have they said, we're going to have to help this joker out, he's got us into a right mess, we're going to have to do something? Or has he gone to them and said, we need to do something?
No, the Bank of England is completely independent. That, at least, is the way our governing bodies are supposed to operate. If the Bank of England wasn't independent, if the Bank of England was perceived to be controlled by the government, then politicians with an eye on the short run, they wouldn't want to put interest rates up. They wouldn't care about inflation in the future. They just want to keep things cheap and cheerful the whole time. So the idea of an independent Bank of England, really since the late 1990s, when New Labour made the central bank independent, that really is sort of baked into the way we run things. Any sense that the Bank of England is taking its orders from the Treasury and elected politicians is bad for credibility. It means we have to raise interest rates more in the long run to convince financial markets that we're serious about squeezing inflation and getting on top of our public finances. Having said that, of course they coordinate, of course they give each other notice of what they're doing. And look, the government's getting a lot of brickbats at the moment. Lots of people want to blame the Conservatives for their tax cuts, though the actual size of the tax cuts, you can say, maybe lowering the top rate of income tax when people are worried about the cost of living is a bit strong, a bit venal, but the size of the tax cuts was very, very small. Some people would say one reason we're in this fix is because the Bank of England itself has been too slow to get out of the blocks and start raising interest rates in a serious way to get on top of inflation. Future historians will tussle about that. But for now, at least, this independent move by the Bank of England, with the government watching closely, as I said, it's early days, Bev, but it seems to have held the road and calmed financial markets for now, which is better than nothing.
I just want to ask you one quick question. I know you haven't got much time, but the headlines today is that this move has saved people's pensions. Is that an exaggeration?
I think it is a bit of an exaggeration. That was what the big gun investment bankers rolled into the Treasury and they warned the Chancellor that unless there's intervention in the gilts market, then pension funds would blow up. I think there's a lot of catastrophism there. I think a lot of these investment banker guys, and I've worked in financial services myself a lot, they want to see the Bank of England keep intervening, buying up bonds. They want to see more quantitative easing, more money printing, which effectively is what's happened today, because that juices up bond markets, it juices up stock markets and makes people with assets even richer. Again, this Future historians will argue about the motivations of people in the here and now. This is a difficult political and financial moment for the UK, but I'm personally glad that this Bank of England intervention hasn't, for now, backfired.
OK, thank you, Liam. Brilliant, as always. Liam Halligan. Kerry, it can feel like you're sort of looking into a snowstorm when you hear this chat about the economy, can't it? I feel like I want to understand it. I really do want to understand that in great detail. But I think for most people, even though we can generally grasp what's going on in the bigger picture, we're feeling it. We are feeling it in our shopping trolleys and on our bills, aren't we? Is that what you're finding?
Yeah, no.
Do you feel like you can get a handle on why it's happening?
Well, I think you're right. Sometimes it feels like looking into a snowstorm. And I was trying to read and understand gilts and the gilt market, and you start to glaze over.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, of course you feel it. You know, if you shop anywhere but Aldi or Lidl, it's a nightmare. And it was great to hear tips on GB News today that there's other places like trolley.com where you can compare your shopping basket, and there's a thing called Approved Food where you can get all sorts of tin stuff at wholesale prices. You know, and unfortunately, you know, I've just invested in cling film for the windows, you know, because we haven't got double glazing, and I'm terrified of switching the heating on. But can I just say on one thing I do understand and get angry about, which Liam hasn't mentioned, I was furious about this IMF intervention and butting in and saying, you know, telling the government, even though I'm not a fan of the, 5p off the 45p tax cut, because I'm not enamoured with it, because I'm so into a budget for growth. I was quite excited by the mini budget, but I can't see how the high rate tax cut. I get the tax investment areas, but I don't understand how cutting the high rate of tax, how that's a push for growth. I don't particularly get that. So I'm not enamoured with that. But for the IMF to turn around and say, oh, you know, this is leading to greater inequality, I'm like, who are you? You know, this is the unelected global elite institution that saw people in Greece, youth unemployment went to 56%. When I was filming in Ghana, you know, Kwesi's heritage, this was the institution saying, oh, no, you're not allowed to provide free secondary education because it's not a basic need or a priority, only universal primary. You know, this is an institution that is a purveyor of austerity and inequality, trying to tell us what to do.
Globalists, Peter Hitchens, dealing in our politics.
Let's at least have a proper British crisis of our own.
Discuss.
But sure, I mean, I don't think the IMF doesn't seem to me to have a particularly impressive hold on matters, but I think a lot of people, apart from the IMF, are a little bit worried about the stewardship of our economy at the moment, and I have to say I'm one of them. But I don't think that it's even sensible to start analysing what's going on here today. This thing began. We had a weak economy before then, but that was just the luck of the draw in a way. We had a weak economy, but in March 2020, when the government decided it was going to hugely overreact to COVID in the way that it did with the furlough scheme and pretty much stopping the national economy for months and months on end, then it sowed the seeds of this disaster. And it was perfectly possible for me, a non-economist, to write accurately that it would lead to many, many things, including the very high levels of inflation we're now experiencing and are likely to experience, because you simply cannot spend money that you have not got on that level without having inflation and other problems. It was entirely predictable. It's come about. This extraordinary inability in this country to look back on that period and recognise the extent of the mistake that we made. This was a country which was like a man who burnt down his house because he found a wasp's nest in it. Completely and utterly overreacted. And we are paying for it. The whole Rishinomics period of furlough and the rest of it was way beyond our means. And if you actually looked at the Treasury books, I haven't looked at it recently for an up-to-date one. The amount of tax which you pay, which simply goes to service the government's debt, is colossal. You're not paying it for schools or roads. You're paying it to pay interest on government debt. And what the government did in its mini-budget, which isn't a mini-budget, was it increased the amount of government debt. So there will be more of that. And the whole gilts business is more government debt. And what Liam Halligan was saying just now about quantitative easing also means that the measures taken today will lead to yet more inflation. Now, that's great if you owe a lot of money, and it's great if you have assets but it's not great for anybody who has savings of any kind. And it's not great for people who live on fixed incomes. In
I
fact,
don't
it's
disagree
very, very
with you, Peter,
punishing for them.
but I do think we have to go back we have to go back pre-lockdown to look at how stagnant Britain has been in terms of, now I'm putting it crudely, in terms of productivity, in terms of industry, in terms of making things. It's been, underinvestment in energy. We are seeing the fruit of that. And while you're right, I don't think we should negate or underestimate the impact of Sunak shutting the British economy down, which he did, and nobody's saying boo to that.
Well, I said boo.
No, you did.
Could,
you did. A few of us did, and people on GBNews did. That's true. But I don't think that's the whole story. I think it's been a very long time coming, which is why, for me, for all their faults and lunacy sometimes, the mini-budget on Friday, which at least said the word growth, was a breath of fresh air, because you just don't hear it, and they are setting up investment zones with tax incentives, and I don't mind that. I'd like them to go much, much further and tell us where is the big push, where can Britain re-industrialise.
People always say growth. They always say growth.
No, they don't mean it.
The result of it, there has been a very, very long period of extremely bad economic stewardship in this country, beginning, in my view, with the deindustrialisation of the country under Mrs. Thatcher, which the Tories later pretended was intentional. It was, in fact, completely an accident. They never meant to do it. And it's left us very exposed to all kinds of things we can't fight. But these things already existed before this, just as the pound was heading downwards for months and weeks before this recent plunge towards parity with the dollar. It's not new that these things are happening. It's just that in this particular week, and of course a lot of people see a great political advantage, understandably, in blaming it on Kwasi Kwarteng's budget.
We haven't
but it's not. And it may have triggered some things, but it isn't by any means.
Apart from Rishi Sunak, who seems to have disappeared now, but apart from him saying, I did try to tell people that we didn't want to have lockdowns, we haven't heard any other politicians of any particular party say that any of this can be attributed to economic policy, which was lockdown policy.
No,
do you think we'll ever see that? What will it take for one of them to say, fair enough, this was a mistake from a financial...
I wish I knew, because unless and until there's a widespread admission that it was a mistake on the grounds of those that did it, on the grounds of those who hysterically supported it in my trade and actually attacked me, I spent a lot of their effort attacking me for dissenting. Unless there's an admission that these people behaved wrongly, I mean, there were certain persons who actually went onto social media demanding that people like me be silenced.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, people were...
Actually silenced by law rather than being allowed to dissent.
Yeah.
People were silenced.
These people need to recognise that they made a terrible mistake. And unless they do, it will happen again.
Yeah, that's the worry. And we've got this twindemic. And what makes me nervous is people like, Keir Starmer and the Labour Party and a whole swathe of the media were really, it was more lockdown, more rules. And it's not just the terrible battering that this had on the economy, but on people's health. I mean, people died because of lockdown.
And we're only just starting to see the implications of this. We're doing a story, actually, just towards the end of the show about how many Wetherspoons pubs are closing down, because I think the implications of that are not just about the finances, that's about lifestyle. We're going to talk about that in just a moment, so don't go anywhere. But coming up in just a moment, a report that Liz Truss's comments about French President Macron dashed a deal to stop migrants crossing the Channel. We'll tell you all about that after this quick break.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV.
On radio and online.
we're proud to be
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Bev Turner, this evening. My panel tonight, which one of our viewers has said, the best panellists you've ever had on. I could listen to them both all night. And he says, congratulations to you all, which is nice, isn't it? Isn't it?
Isn't that nice?
Hello.
Makes a change from Twitter.
It does. Our viewers are lovely. Right, you've been sending in your opinions. I've just read you one of them. Thomas has said, for the good of the country, the Chancellor must resign. Resign now. Do not return to government front benches. Don't do that. We don't want any more massive resignations. We just want a little bit of stability for a while, if you don't mind. Andrew says, I wouldn't take it from the IMF. They're as much use as the WHO, which is also useless. Philip says PM Truss is bravely following Trump and Reaganomics in changing the economy, and it will put more money in people's pockets and grow the UK economy. I don't know whether we were convinced about the growth part of it here. And Brian said shopping trolley increases are nothing to do with the recent budget. Right, moving on. Peter, you work at the Mail on Sunday, of course. Beautifully writing in the Mail on Sunday. Well, the Daily Mail had a story today. They say that Britain and France had agreed a deal to allow British border officers to patrol the French coast and stop migrants crossing the Channel. But Liz Truss, who was campaigning at the time to win the Conservative leadership contest and famously said the jury was out on whether French President Emmanuel Macron is a friend or foe of Britain during that contest. Now, apparently the French were so incensed by this that they scrapped the deal. Neither the Home Office nor the French Interior Ministry has denied this report. So we're kind of just asking here, could we have put an end to the migrant crossings if Liz Truss hadn't said something a bit clumsy in a hustings being hosted by a rival radio station? What do you reckon, Peter?
It's entirely possible. Relations between this country and France are constantly made difficult by the fact that they are our principal rival. We and they have for centuries been at rivalry with each other. There's this wonderful phrase, they are that sweet enemy. They are both our closest friend and our longest-standing rival in many ways, and it's perfectly possible that someone like Macron would have been offended by if someone campaigning for the Downing Street saying something like that. Actually, though, I think, and I've been arguing this for some time now, this deal is going to have to be made. It doesn't matter to me what it costs. I went down there to take a look at the beaches a few weeks ago, and I concluded from it that there really isn't any more a sea border between us and France. To all intents and purposes, it's a land border. Therefore, we have to have total cooperation with them to control it.
You mean it's just so easy to cross?
It's so easy to cross. It was an illusion we had for years that it was uncrossable. It isn't. We have to have their cooperation, and I don't care what we pay for it, because it's so urgent. And I think that, as someone who both admires and to some extent laughs at the French at the same time, I think that if we really, really tried, we could get such a deal. And encouraged me about the story was that an effort had been made to make it. And I very much hope it will be resumed.
Yeah, well, the aborted deal apparently, Kerry, the government were going to pay £50 million to the French for boosted joint patrols. Home Office immigration intelligence officials would have been among those allowed to work on French territory, along with other UK Border Force officers. It seems a little unlikely. Does it seem unlikely that Macron is watching the telly? He hears Liz Truss say she's not sure whether they're friend or foe, and he sort of goes, "Zut alors, I'm not going to hang out. I'm not going to cooperate with these people."
Is he that thin-skinned? I think it could have happened, actually, and I do think there's an element of diplomatic incompetence on Liz Truss's part. Although I have to say, Peter's right about, best friends and worst enemies. Historically, I'm not sure that it's history that matters now. I think we have to look at Macron more politically for the present, and he's an EU man compared with how he sees the British government. So there's been, hostility on that front, and there was rows all the time. I mean, the 50 million thing isn't new either, is it?
No.
Because Boris Johnson was talking 50 million. What we hadn't heard was that there was actually going to be British patrols on the ground. I do think Peter's right. I think everything has to be done to sort this out, overcome whatever offence has been taken, and stop these horrendous drownings and boats coming across.
If you doubt that this is Macron's reaction, just imagine it the other way. If some French politician on the verge of becoming president had made a similar remark,
we'd be up in arms.
Go wild.
I want to talk about pubs, guys, because we've only got a little bit left. It's absolutely flown by. This was a story that was in the press today. Wetherspoons. If you've got teenagers, you will know this is a very popular establishment for the youth in this country. They are closing 32 pubs. They're every area from Barnsley through, it's about 10 of them in London, Redditch, Sevenoaks, Southampton, Stafford. Why is it tragic, Kerry? I know why, but why do you think this?
I think it's the beginning of probably what's going to be quite a run of businesses closing, because I understand it. For Wetherspoons, it's costs. Actually, they treat their staff very well. They're incredibly cheap. It's the only place, it's not just young people. I go to a lot of Wetherspoons with my husband because it's the only place we can afford to eat out. Yeah. And it's actually mostly older people and often quite lonely people and unemployed people.
It's almost a social service.
Yeah, it's almost and people do say,
it's a place to go, which they really
it's where you go if you're on the dole, is you can afford to eat out at Wetherspoons, which is sad. It's also really nice food, and they've got the best hotels known to man. For under 50 quid a night, you can get a really good double room, and it's really spacious. So we can actually afford to stay somewhere, which is fantastic. So I think it's an utter tragedy, but I think it's a broader problem for the hospitality industry and the pubs' decline in Britain, which means we are seeing fewer and fewer social spaces for a younger generation to even meet face-to-face.
That's right.
They do it all on their phone.
Yes, absolutely.
And they stay at home.
But again, it's the COVID panic that's brought this about. People have stopped doing what they used to do. They haven't got back to normal. Yeah. And all the high streets, not just Wetherspoons that's closing, there's many, many other places that
are going to go.
So they can't get the staff to run them. They can't get the people to come to them. And it's that whole way of life that we had before the panic is proving very hard to re-establish. And people can't afford to run these businesses anymore.
And I think it makes for a very antisocial future. And I think we have to resist it and find ways to create new social spaces, because otherwise, what sort of young generation will we have? They will be
isolated, they will be depressed, they will not have social skills, they will not meet the love of their life. They will have all sorts of different issues because, as you say, there's all very well sitting in a room looking at that, but you need them out in the pub meeting each other, don't you? It's such a significant social change. I feel like it's all happening very quietly, very slowly, and we're going to turn around at some point in the next 5 years and go, do you remember what life
But there's one very encouraging piece of news this morning. Did you see the report of the pub in Cornwall, which has decided to light itself with candles?
Lovely.
To save electricity. And it turns out everybody really loves it.
And it probably cancels out their fire insurance.
Or someone will come and give it the wagging finger.
The health and safety.
I'm sorry, I should have realised that.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Talking of pubs, I'm going to go to a man who is no stranger to a pub. Good evening, Lawrence Fox. How are you? What have you got coming up tonight?
Not pubs, Bev, but we're going to talk woke policing, unrepentant criminals. Have Labour finally found an actual left-wing policy? And are we heading towards strikes and a winter of discontent?
With all cheery stuff. Welcome to GB News, Lawrence Fox. Do you know, I can't wait for a time when we can talk about happy stories. When do you think that's going to be?
I think happy stories, from my long experience of journalism, is a contradiction in terms, isn't it? News is when something goes wrong.
Yeah, but it didn't always used to be this bleak. It hasn't always been this bleak, has it, Kerry? It feels like a tough time.
It does feel like... Well, actually...
do you really want to do stories about bicycling poodles?
Oh, no, but no, don't do it, Bev. Don't go there. No, for me, the happy story was when they said they were going to do this energy cap for business, because the charity I run counts as business, and we've had a 500% increase, so we've turned the heating off.
And there we go, ending on a downer with the Kerry Dingle turning off the heating. Right, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a lovely evening. I've enjoyed it. I'll be back tomorrow at 6 o'clock. Lawrence is on in just a moment. See you later.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Outbreaks of rain will spread to some areas overnight, with clear spells in other places and a chilly start for Thursday. Low pressure at the moment towards Denmark, and we've still got this rather cool northerly airflow. It's bringing a number of showers and in places some more persistent rain, for example. An occluded front heading into eastern Scotland, northern England through the evening will bring persistent rain in places. That will sink south into central parts of the UK, eventually clearing into Wales and the southwest by dawn, turning more showery as it pushes south. Clear spells following. Under those clear skies, some mist and fog forming across the Midlands, eastern England, for example, and a chilly start in places first thing Thursday, where we get those clear spells. Temperatures in some spots into the low single figures. But after any mist and fog clear, after the sun warms things up, actually for many, it's a brighter afternoon. Sunny spells, but there will be further showers coming along, especially for eastern Scotland, eastern parts of England, into central areas. Temperatures, though, up a degree or so compared with Wednesday. We're looking at 18 Celsius, the top temperature there for parts of Wales and the southwest. Now to Thursday evening, areas of showers will push south, fading away, and lengthy clear spells then for many, at least at first. But for Scotland and Northern Ireland, thicker clouds start to arrive, the wind picks up, and by the early hours, outbreaks of rain into the far northwest. That'll keep things mild here, but across central and eastern parts of the UK, well, it's a colder night to come, with low single figures in places and some dense fog around first thing Friday. The fog will last until around mid-morning, then it'll clear. Bright skies follow for the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast, at least for a time, before wind and rain sweep in from the west. Heavy rain, particularly over western hills, and strong winds reaching gale force in exposed spots. Saturday's also a blustery day with rain or showers, but it turns drier on Sunday.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV.
On radio.
and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's
News channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover